you're behind to the Chiefs in the fourth quarter and willingly giving them the ball when your defense has just not been able to stop them for the whole second half. So like you, I didn't think that much of the punt when it happened, but then after seeing what the model said and then thinking about the position that they put themselves in, like you have to stop the Chiefs at some point and try to basically score a touchdown every time your team has the ball, and they just never got the stop that they needed to.
Welcome to Unexpected Points. I am your host, Kevin Cole. Joining me today on the pod, a frequent guest, somewhat frequent guest, Ben Baldwin. You all know him on Twitter, riling up Packers fans, lamenting everything going on with the Seahawks, and more importantly, probably one of the most impactful people when it comes to sports analytics, football analytics, ever. Honestly, the work that he has done and a bunch of others, Sebastian Tan, a bunch of other guys have done, working on the NFL verse, making all of that data free and available to everyone. I talk about it somewhat at the end of our conversation here. Just amazing stuff. I mean, I'm using all the stuff that I'm doing on the Substack, which you should subscribe to, of course, unexpectedpoints.substack.com. I'm using all that stuff, and I don't know where I would be without it, quite honestly. Not only a lot of data out there, but just so easy to use. We talk a little bit at the end of the episode about how to access all that stuff and to use it here. But what we primarily talk about in this episode, do a little recap on the Super Bowl from a nerd's perspective, talking a lot about the decision-making, whether it's on fourth down, whether to go for two or not at the end of the game, how to play clock management, things like that, our disappointment or lack thereof in what the coaches' decisions were in this game. So we discuss all that in a lot of detail. Then we talk about the Chiefs and the Eagles moving on this offseason, how they should be looking at things. And then lastly, talking about his beloved Seahawks, Geno Smith contract, all that stuff, how they should be approaching things in the offseason. Follow Ben on Twitter at Ben B. Baldwin. And again, you can follow me on Twitter at Kevin Cole _, and go to my Substack. Unexpectedpoints.substack.com. Get a subscription there. You can get a free sub for a week. And if you cannot afford it, go ahead, shoot me a note through various platforms, and I will comp you a free, no questions asked, 6-month sub to all premium content. All right, everybody, let's get to the podcast here. And here is Ben Baldwin. All right, Ben, welcome to the pod. It's been a little while, I think, since I've had you on here. We'll talk a little bit about an exercise that we did in the past about front offices and everything else, but it's really going to be in relation to what we just saw in the Super Bowl. So we're going to talk Super Bowl. We're going to talk some game. We're going to grind some film on here. Are you ready, Ben?
I'm ready.
Okay, good. Okay, so first off, let's talk about some news stuff first. There's not like huge news out here, but maybe we can at least address what we saw this morning. Shane Steichen, I believe is how you pronounce his name. I should probably know that better. Is now going to be the head coach of the Indianapolis Colts, the former offensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles. And then we also got some more minor news about Jim Caldwell joining the staff of the Panthers, where they're bringing in a lot of gray hairs over there at the Panthers going on. You have any initial takes on Steichen as the hire here for the Colts?
Yeah, I think it's a perfectly reasonable hire. He's probably gotten the most out of the offenses he's coached. Hasn't failed anywhere and is young, and so probably has upside. I know you have research that shows that like maybe there's an edge in hiring people that have coached before and gotten, like, we have seen them succeed in the past. So maybe you'll have a different take on that. But if I were a Colts fan, I would be pretty happy with how they did this.
Yeah. I'm most happy with the fact that it's not Jeff Saturday.
Yep.
Not that I have anything against him. Not that I even know with any degree of certainty whether or not Saturday would be a good coach. Not that I care that they won their first game with Saturday and then just fell apart down the stretch. Like, none of that stuff really matters. It's more, it just smells like pretty bad process to have someone who the owner, Jim Irsay, seems to just really like and respect and have a lot of admiration for as a player, to then elevate him into this head coaching role after having, I think it was 1 season of high school football coaching experience and nothing else there. It just, this is a highly variable, highly low degree of confidence for a lot of these different opinions, but I think directionally that would have been a poor hire. And I also think it would have said something about the position and influence of Chris Ballard, where we're not inside of these buildings, but at least it appears, and it's been reported, I believe, by Zach Kiefer and maybe some other people over at the Athletic, that if you look at like major decisions that have been made over the course of the last 18 months, number one, getting rid of Carson Wentz, where I don't think that's a bad decision to get rid of Wentz necessarily, but it sounds like Irsay was 100% putting his foot down to go and do that. So that was executed quickly. Benching Matt Ryan seems to have been an ownership decision more so than a coach or GM decision. The initial time that, obviously there's like, he was in, he was out, he was in, he was out. But at the point in time when he was benched, I think they were a 500 record, and it wasn't like they were out of that division by any means at that point in time. So that happened. And then lastly was firing Frank Reich and bringing in Saturday, at least from the press conference that I heard there. It just had strong hints that Ballard was almost trying to talk Irsay out of doing it, but he couldn't do that as part of his decision. So the fact that the Steichen is coming in, maybe that's a good sign that Ballard, and I think Ballard will be a better decision maker than Jim Irsay going forward, still has and still retains some power in the organization.
Yeah, I guess that's the hope. And it's interesting, the parallels between the Steichen hire and the Reich hire, where I'm sure a million people have noticed this before. I haven't had a chance to read any news yet, but like they both came from the Eagles after a very successful season. And I think Frank Reich is, like you said, there's a lot of uncertainty in coaches, but I think we can probably be fairly certain that Frank Reich is at least a above average NFL coach, and he probably got a raw deal in Indianapolis where he had a season of Andrew Luck and then very little to work with after that. And I think if and when he gets a job elsewhere, I think he should probably be pretty successful. And we'll see if the same ends up being true of Steichen coming in.
Yeah. I think Reich is going to be successful in for Carolina. So we'll see if that ends up being the case. Yeah, again, it's probably there are a lot of traits displayed by Steichen that fall into what's good about being a head coach. It's just being a good offensive coordinator and being a good head coach are two very, very different things. I think maybe you just have being part of the Eagles organization and everything they have there. There's obviously a big influence for coaches on meeting with the research and development people, the assistant GM now over with the Eagles, whose name is escaping me right now, but he's been around there forever, and he's kind of like the research guy who grew up through that organization right there. So heavy influence there, Howie Roseman, everything. So that kind of seeps in, and probably at the very least is going to tilt the members of the organization to be a little bit more friendly to what they're doing there. And also, he saw the success firsthand with what Sirianni was doing with his decision making in the season, maybe not necessarily in the Super Bowl for one instance, but during the season. We'll talk about that a little bit going forward. So hopefully that'll be good there. You have any opinion on Caldwell? I don't know if we even really need to talk about it. I thought it was interesting that he's back in the mix after having been like the preferred Rooney Rule interview for quite a number of years there without ever landing a head coaching job again. But I'm not sure if it really changes any way that I view the Carolina Panthers going forward.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. It's hard enough to evaluate head coaches, but people who are going to be coming in who are not head coaches, it's so hard to know how much influence they have in one direction or another. So yeah, I also do not have strong opinions.
Yeah. I'm not really, whether the game is passed people by, all that sort of stuff. I don't really know about any of that. But obviously, they're bringing in him, and Don Capers is bringing in some older guys there who can maybe bring a lot of experience with them. So hopefully that'll be different, obviously, than what we saw as far as NFL experience and coaching experience, at least head coaching experience, at least when it came with Matt Rule. So hopefully they're not like zagging a little too much after having the issues with Rule. You don't want to just go and do the exact opposite there and go the opposite way. But I do have faith in Frank Reich there being the head of the organization. All right, let's talk Super Bowl. enjoyable game, except for the people, RIP, people who love defense. That contingent out there, because that was not happening in this game here. But let's talk about some of these fourth down calls, because we might as well get into the nerd shit immediately here. And for me, going into this game, we all said that the Eagles were going to have the advantage because we know Andy Reid. We love Andy Reid. We also know that he's just not going to lean into the opportunities that he potentially has there once in this game, not doing so. But we thought Sirianni would be on the opposite side. So let's maybe talk about the one decision, because there weren't a lot. So at least there weren't that many opportunities where Reid passed up going for it.
Yep.
Mahomes is really good at probably not even getting to third down, not even having the ball a lot. So I guess that helps too. But there was the one field goal from, what was it, the 24-yard line, something like that,
yes,
that they ended up missing there. You tweeted about this, and I kind of fall into the same line with you, where it's in that zone where you're not close enough to the end zone to necessarily, a conversion doesn't make a touchdown extremely probable like it would from inside the 10-yard line. And at the same point in time, you're not far enough away to really lower the, drastic exponential decline of field goal percentage once you start to get out beyond, let's say, 45, 50 yards on the field goal. You're still in that good field goal range there with about a 40-yard field goal. So it's not the worst decision there. Is that how you viewed it? I know it's what the model said. Do you have any critiques of what a model may say in this instance versus how you should execute it in the game?
Nope, I think that's exactly right. And it's, for this one, it's not just my model. I'm pretty sure this is also true of the old New York Times spot, which was based on Brian Burke's old model, as well as the new ESPN model, which is Brian Burke's new model, and my model. And this is the one place on the field, and it's also kind of unique to being exactly 4th and 3. So if it's 4th and 3 around the top of the red zone, that is like the one place where you should sort of feel comfortable kicking a field goal on 4th and 3. And that there's most places on the field that's not true, but it's the combination of the conversion percent being relatively low if you do go for it. So this model said it was close to 50-50, where for the field goal attempt, it was more like 5 out of 6, 84%. And yes, I know the field goal is missed, and I know that their field goal kicker has been having issues. So if you want to do, like, you could make some little adjustments, and maybe it would be a little bit stronger lean to go for it. And I don't have a problem with people saying that, yeah, it's the Super Bowl. Andy Reid should trust Patrick Mahomes more than Harrison Butker, but it's not like it was a very strong, obvious error like the last Philadelphia one that we'll get to.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, those types of arguments anyway, you're like, right, you should trust. There we go. You won the argument there. Patrick Mahomes is better than Harrison Butker. Okay, let's talk about like how you can think about adjusting the model, because I think this is important. This is always going to be the biggest critique, right, of any model-based thing. And again, you probably get more critiques on this in a lot of ways that they should, from the other side, that they should have gone for it, because it's Eagles side of the field, it's Chiefs offense, at least amongst a certain subset of people who I say are analytically friendly, but maybe haven't had as much experience digging into like all the evidence and knowing all the ins and outs. Like, they are actually going to be different than what we would complain about for people, right? We complain about people leaning towards conservatism. I think in this way, if you were going to poll the media and analysts and other people who are more numbers friendly types, they would probably lean further towards going for it than a model would say in this circumstance. Do you think there's anything missing from the model that goes into their calculus, probably primarily being the Kansas City Chiefs' ability to convert from beyond 4th and short?
Yeah, so I think there's two things here, and they would both push towards going for it. Number one is I don't have kicker ability in my model, and that's because for the most part, all kickers are basically the same except for Justin Tucker. So I've, like, in my mind, I've thought about maybe I should put like the Ravens have the ball into the model and just let field goal kicking be adjusted that way. But
yeah, I think is Tucker or something binary variable. Yeah, I mean, it's not just like there isn't a big difference in skill. It's that we don't have any confidence of based upon the evidence whether there is a predictive difference in skill going forward. You know, a couple of misses here, a couple of misses there, a couple of makes there can make a huge difference as far as like the rank ordering of kickers and how well they perform so far in their careers.
Yeah, and I think so that's the reason there is no kicking strength in the model. I think in this case, if we did do it and put maybe more weight on recent performance, then we really would have a lower probability of make for Harrison Butker, and maybe this would change the field goal probability from like, I don't know, 84% to 80% or something like that. And that would be a small nudge towards going for it. And then the other one is, like you said, the Chiefs offense, where there's not a huge sample size of fourth downs for any team, but if we used performance on third downs as a kind of estimate for how we might expect a team to do on fourth downs, one thing we know about Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs is that they have been incredible on third downs throughout the course of his career. So again, if we put a team-specific estimate into this and estimated our success probability, maybe instead of 54%, it would be 60% or something like that. And if you did those two together, the model would say so this had going forward is 0.9 percentage points higher. I think ESPN's was like 1.1 percentage points. So it's 1% better going for it. If we made those two small adjustments that kind of are consistent with how the football guys and other viewers would see the game, that would push us towards a 2% advantage for going for it. And then it becomes more clear that they really shouldn't have kicked that field goal.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think what's nice about Andy Reid not thinking about going for it on fourth down is that when it's 3rd and 5, they're trying to convert. They're not trying to get it to 4th and 1. So we could use that. There's very few teams, the Eagles being one of them, where you actually might have to think about, oh, you know what, on 3rd down and 5, they're not necessarily trying to convert. They actually have a contingency plan ready to go if they don't make it there and are thinking about that. Okay, the one other thing that I think is interesting, and this is another one, this is going to fall more into things that can dissuade coaches normally from doing the aggressive thing, but it's like a game specific sort of thing. The quote unquote, my left guard is getting killed sort of equation. But this is a little bit different, which is it was pretty early in the game when this happened, but if it happened late in the game, if this was like a game-winning field goal type of situation versus going for it from a little bit further out, I might have actually thought about how to incorporate the fact that players are slipping on the field. And we even saw on a kickoff, I believe it was Jake Elliott, I don't think it was Butker, we saw him slip and go down on the kick. Do you think that's something that should be incorporated, or is it one of those things like most things are that if we try to incorporate it, we're probably making our decision worse?
Yeah, so I think it would be hard to incorporate early in the game, but if it were later in the game, you could build into a model something like how successful both offenses have been to this point, and then use that as like kind of a minor adjustment for like if it's a quote unquote toss-up situation like this, nudging you in one direction or the other. But if you see that neither team has really been able to stop the other, then the value of a field goal is going to be relatively less relative to the value of possession and the possible chance to score a touchdown.
Well, what about even the probability of the kicker like not being able to plant properly?
That one's probably impossible to quantify. So that one that's really a gut decision, wild guess.
Yeah, I want to think about this a little bit though, because I think this is interesting. They don't have they're not whipping out their laptop and rerunning models during the course of games to incorporate these sorts of things, right? Yeah, I don't know what those surfaces, what they're doing with those Microsoft Surfaces, other than if you're Aaron Rodgers, slamming it down when you don't like what you're seeing there. But you have probably scenarios, a bunch of different scenarios played out on there. Maybe you even have some kind of color coordinated, map of the field where you're going for it or not based upon how many yards to go, something easy and intuitive to be able to reference. I should probably ask some of those dudes what exactly they're looking at there. But that would be another question. How do you make an in-game adjustment for something like that? How would you think about making an in-game adjustment for something like that? Is it just back of the envelope? You're taking the input of success rate on the field goal, and you're just like, I'll just take it down a couple of percent and then see how back of the envelope that would affect things? I'm
guessing it would be even more crude than that, where you have like based on the area of the field, score differential, and yards to go, you have like green, yellow, red, or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's not like you're giving percentage chances to the coaches, I would imagine. So maybe the way you would approach this is, if a decision was yellow or a toss-up or however you want to call it, maybe instead of treating it like a toss-up, you say, okay, this was a situation where going into the game, we thought we would be happy either way, but because of X factor that we observed, maybe this should nudge us in one direction more than another.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that again, but I think the danger in that though is if you set that precedent, then like every single game your coach is like toss-ups, we're not because of X reason or Y reason or everything. So yeah, it's definitely one of those things where you have to have like faith that you're going to be getting the right response also from the coaches, and they're going to kind of be locked into what they're doing there. And speaking of that, okay, I think the real important decision that we're talking about here is the Eagles, with 10 minutes and I think it was 30 seconds left in the game, down by 1 at this point. So they were up by 6. Kansas City scored, down by 1. They had the ball on, I should have this in my access, but it was like they're on 30-something yard line. And it was 4th and 3.
Yeah, 4th and 3 at their 32.
At their 32. Okay, so 4th and 3 at their 32. Now, this is the decision, right? Because as much praise as we want to heap on Sirianni, and I do think he gives you like an incremental benefit on the margins, or maybe even a little bit more than that, versus other coaches. The times that the Eagles had gone for it prior to this, one was a 4th and 5 in the dead zone, on Kansas City side of the field, but too far for a field goal. So it's kind of like, by the numbers, it's like a no-brainer. Plus, you're on the Kansas City side of the field. They did another time on the Kansas City side of the field. They got a offsides call well within Kansas City side of the field too, on a 4th and 2.
Yeah, those were the same drive. Those two were the same drive.
So what these are ones where maybe there are some coaches who wouldn't have done it in those circumstances, but I don't think there would be as much risk from a criticism / and I always talk about regret aversion. I think that's a big thing. It's not just risk aversion. I think it's whether or not these coaches will regret their decision that they had made. This would have been a big regret decision if it didn't go well, and they lost the game at that point, because of the fact that it would have been like the storyline after the game, even if it wasn't necessarily the reason that they lost it. But it was a significant gain going forward in this circumstance. What did you think about everything that went down there? And I was a little bit surprised by the fact that there weren't that many people necessarily even talking about it at that point in time, at least that I was trying to stay off of Twitter, but from what I saw on Twitter.
Yeah. So before that one, I actually disagree a little bit about the earlier decisions. I think there are so many coaches who would not have treated so this was one of the last drives before halftime. So I think Philadelphia had 3rd and 6 at the Kansas City 45, called a run play because they knew they were in 4-down territory, which I think
their third down decisioning, including the one that led to the fumble six, was probably much different than what others would have been, because they knew they had 4th down. I definitely agree with that.
And then they only got 1 yard on that play, which left them with 4th and 5 at the Kansas City 44. And yes, I'm a Seahawks fan, so there's definitely a bias there, but I think there are so many coaches that would have punted in that situation.
True. Okay, I'll give you that. But I'm just saying, you're not going to get pillared as much, I don't think, in that circumstance. Okay.
And then the next one, tie game, 3 minutes left in the first half, 4th and 2. I think since it wasn't a 4th and 1, it was also not like, yes, they should have gone for it. My model said there was a 5 percentage point advantage with going for it, but I think there are so many teams that would have kicked a field goal there. We've seen the Bills do that against the Chiefs in the playoffs, where they've been amazing on 4th downs during the regular season. They get to a playoff game against the Chiefs, and then every time they have a chance to kick a field goal, they kick a field goal. So
it was 2 yards. It was also in that area where it was not, the 2-yard line. They weren't 2 yards away from scoring, and it was at a very, very high field goal percentage area. So it wasn't analogous to the Chiefs decision. It was more of a go for it, but there were some similarities there.
Yep. So I say all that to say that's why it's so disappointing that they messed it up later in the game. And it's a lot harder to go for this because, it's a 4th and 3 at your own 32 in the fourth quarter of a Super Bowl. So yeah, I totally empathize with freezing up or making the safe play or whatever, but it's that plus the combination of I haven't watched the coaches film of this yet, but it looked on the third down play, they were trying to set up a shot. Like they called a pass play. It was 3rd and 2. There were no routes that I could see on the broadcast screen. So if you're going to do that, then you would think that you would do that with going for 4th down in mind. So that's kind of the first inconsistency. And then the second is that you're behind to the Chiefs in the fourth quarter and willingly giving them the ball when your defense has just not been able to stop them for the whole second half. So yeah, I didn't even think, like you, I didn't think that much of the punt when it happened, but then after seeing what the model said and then thinking about the position that they put themselves in, like you have to stop the Chiefs at some point and try to basically score a touchdown every time your team has the ball, and they just never got the stop that they needed to.
Yeah. I mean, I think the underappreciated thing that maybe drives the numbers a little bit further towards going for it than even I would have anticipated, because it was more in the like clear you should go for it type of category than the coin flip-ish field goal that the Chiefs did earlier. I think it's really thinking about how the range of scenarios in terms of possessions going forward, the number of possessions for each team going forward. Like you look at the clock and you say 10 minutes and 33 seconds left to go. That's almost a full quarter and this and that. But once you get within a quarter and you are ceding the first possession to the other team, there's just an overwhelming number, well, not an overwhelming, but a pretty strong majority type of number of scenarios where, at best you're getting the same number of possessions as the other team, already down by 1 also. So you're already down by 1. It's not a tie. You're not the same number of possessions means you still have to do something even better than your opponent. And then the opponent having more possessions is a very significant number with an offense for the Chiefs that's going to average, 4 points per possession or something like that. And I think that's what really makes the difference is we think about that and we don't realize, there's just so many different scenarios here where the Eagles only have 1 more possession for the rest of this game and the Chiefs have 2. That's twice as much opportunity, and it's just an overwhelming number.
Yeah, and because they were behind, if the Chiefs scored a touchdown, which is what happened, and they had scored touchdowns on the prior 2 drives, and then obviously the punt return didn't help, but scored a touchdown again. Once you're down by 8 points, you need so many things to go right from that point to have a chance. And they got a lot of those things that they needed, but they needed score a touchdown, get a 2-point conversion, stop the Chiefs with enough time to get the ball back, and then either match what the Chiefs did and win in overtime or beat what the Chiefs did. And that's just so many more things that have to go right rather than putting the ball in the hands of our very good offense on a 4th and 3 where we have the chance to actually take the lead in this game.
Yeah. And 4th and 3 conversion rate, again, if I was going to make a team-specific conversion rate, I don't know. The Eagles might even be higher than the Chiefs. I mean, the Chiefs would be higher once we get out to like 5, 6, 7, 8 yards, something like that. But that's like right in the wheelhouse for that offense also, I think. The way that they operate. And I mean, we just know from history that like quarterback rushes are really, really good for 2-point conversions and things like that. So we're talking about a little bit more than a 2-point conversion. And we saw that with Jalen Hurts later and his ability to convert that 2-pointer. Let's talk about the Chiefs' decision to kick the field goal. Kick the extra point after their touchdown. Now, I did not think there was any chance Andy Reid would do it, but I'm always a little bit surprised by people's reaction, because I feel like people's confidence in what you should be doing with 2-pointers is like way too high or they're way too adamant about it versus some 4th downs where you're gaining 3, 4, 5, 6 times the win probability that people are not that that big of a lean on it. But as long as there's even the slightest bit of incremental win probability gain in people's minds on a 2-point conversion, they're like, I can't believe you're not doing this sort of situation. What did you think about that? Their choice where the Chiefs, everyone wants to kind of like seal the game. And again, I think it might be a little bit of a regret aversion sort of thing. Like if you go for the 2 and miss and the other team comes down and scores, and then they're going to kick the 1 with that much time left, right? Mm-hmm. You have a tie game. You can still play it out. You go forwards. You don't feel that bad. But if you don't go for it and then you're like, oh man, we could have killed them. Like we had our chance to put the death blow and we didn't do it. Like maybe there's more regret in feeling that. I don't know how to parse it out.
Yeah, definitely agree about the relative magnitude of the 2-point versus 4-point. Like if it's not a situation near the end of the game where you're down by 2 or up by 1 or something like that, where the going for 2 is very, very obvious, then the magnitude of a 2-point decision is going to be like at most 1 percentage point or something like that. And we see 4th down errors bigger than that all the time and nobody blinks an eye. But yeah, people just have very strong feelings about 2-point conversions for one reason or another. Regarding
do you have a feeling about this specific what the Chiefs should have done there, even if it was marginal?
So I think my model said kicking the extra point was right by like 1 percentage point, and I think ESPN's model said to go for it by something less than a percentage point. But I think we can be pretty confident that the bounds are between 1 and -1 percentage point for the kicking the extra point decision.
Yeah.
At the time.
Go ahead.
At the time, I was okay with kicking, but then after thinking about it more and incorporating some hindsight bias, seeing what happened, I think that the advantage of, like we just discussed with the Eagles and converting short distances, the advantage of being up by 8 against the Eagles probably isn't as much as it would be against another team where they're, because of Hurts and his rushing threat, they probably are legitimately a tier above at converting 2-point conversions. And we could probably say that about the Chiefs too, where they're the benefit of going for 2 for them is associated with both the Chiefs' likelihood of conversion and the Eagles' likelihood of conversion. And both of those are pretty high. So if you put that together and say they should have gone for 2, then I can't argue against that, even though my model would disagree very, very, very slightly.
Yeah, no, I agree. I was thinking about it more afterwards also. And you're right. It's like both it's not like you're not weighing your conversion rate versus the other team's conversion rate and who's better or not. It's actually directionally both of them. If you feel like you're better than the average, that means you should go for it because you're giving your team an opportunity to go for it. And then if you get it or don't get it, you're taking their teams to off of the board because they're either going to kick a 1 to tie it. At least they should, unless there's like no time left, and there's plenty of time left in this game. Or if you were up by 9, they should still kick the 1 to be down by 2, and then try to win it, and then win it eventually for field goal. Being down by 1 versus being down by 2 is not going to help them a ton unless they're thinking about, well, if we give up another touchdown, then what will happen? I guess there's some scenarios. I'd have to think about that a little bit more. I don't think you go for it there because you put yourself in a bad spot really going forward. But I guess there's some possibility that they'll go for it there. But at least in one scenario, the scenario where you don't make it, you take their 2-point conversion off of the board.
Yep. Yeah, the mathematical expression under the assumption that there's only this Chiefs touchdown and the Eagles score touchdown. If those are the only scores left in the game, then I think it's like the sum of the 2-point conversion probabilities has to be higher than the PAT probability or something like that. And I think we could be fairly confident that would be the case in this game.
Yeah. I think that one's I mean, not a no-brainer, but that one's I definitely would be confident in that one, even without, lowering anything for the kickers or anything like that. Anything else that stood out to you as far as a decision making here? There were some calls, and I think it would have been one of these things where I don't know what sort of win probability gain you're getting off of, but there were some calls to quote unquote let them score before the Chiefs at the end of the game here. So this is the Chiefs' last possession. I guess it would. I'm trying to think of when it was. I guess it would have been right on first down. People were saying to let them score, or was it on second down? I don't remember. But all I remember is on first down. The Chiefs only got a couple of yards.
Yep. That was right
so
before the 2-minute warning. Yeah.
before the 2-minute warning. And I don't know, like, again, I think that was another one. Maybe this is similar to the 2-point conversion thing. I think people are maybe a little bit too confident that the Chiefs were just going to score a touchdown. Like they were going to score a touchdown anyway, no matter what. So therefore, just let them do it now and have as much time as possible. I wouldn't have said let them score unless they got into like a 2nd and 1 type of situation or something like that.
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, my let them score was, so at the 2-minute warning, it was 2nd and 8. The Eagles still had 2 timeouts. So
yes,
my take was, if the Chiefs get a first down, let them score on that play, but not intentionally let them score without giving any resistance. Because if they had stopped them on that 3rd down, it would be, well, especially since they threw on 3rd down, there would have been basically 2 minutes left with the Eagles having a timeout and just needing a field goal, which is like that's a pretty good situation given the state that they started that series on. So I would not have gone into that, like the 2nd down or 3rd down play, saying we're going to let them score no matter what, but we would much rather let them score than have a first down without scoring.
Yes. Okay, and then play calling. I didn't love the 2nd and 8 play from the Chiefs because I don't remember if it was Juju or it probably was Juju.
Yep.
It was like a screen. It was like a wide receiver screen. So it was, let's make sure we're running clock. Like it was a secondary notion to get the first down. But I mean, more of a a higher probability than a run, I guess. But as an inside screen too, it wasn't really a wide screen. Maybe, I don't know why, maybe purposely to make the pass shorter, to make sure that it's more likely that it's caught and you don't grind clock there. I wasn't in love with that, I guess. If I were the Chiefs, I would have said, let's give Mahomes 2 chances to convert here. Better chances to convert there. And okay, lastly though, we got to get to the holding call, because I think we're in a little bit of disagreement maybe with what's going on with the holding call here. Why don't you give me your case or give me your overall feeling on this holding call, which has become a big storyline. Although I think, like a lot of times for these things, I think it's going to fade away, and it's really just going to be maybe an Eagles fan talking point a year or 2 from now. But I don't think anyone's really going to think about it in the future.
Yeah, so I think it's, in some ways, it's kind of similar to the late hit on Mahomes in the Bengals game, where nobody should blame the official for throwing the flag. They saw a flag. As someone who did not care in any way who won the game, it's a disappointing way for the game to end, because you're in the Bengals game, that game probably would have gone to overtime, which would be great because there's more football. In the Eagles game, we were deprived of the chance to see what the Eagles could do to respond. So I think so far there's no disagreement.
No disagreement. Although I might have been more pro Kansas City in both circumstances. Definitely against the Bengals. I could not take a Joe Burrow Burrowhead. I could not take that going forward.
Yeah. So I think part of the reason, like, you and Timo are so upset about people complaining about the officials is because you guys were rooting really hard for the Chiefs. But
that might have been part of it, but it's part of my thing. I defend the officials a lot because it annoys me. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, but for somebody who, like, I don't care if the Chiefs win or not. I just wanted to see an exciting finish, and we did not get that finish.
Yeah.
I think the difference between the Bengals game, where, like, there's 100% no doubt that flag should have been thrown, and the Eagles game was, like, I can't blame the official for throwing the flag, but when you watch that play, yes, the jersey was grabbed, but it's not, he didn't look very restricted, which is like, we're getting into degrees of restriction, but there's a lot of defensive holding calls where, like, you see the jersey tug and you see the defender moving or being turned or restricted in some way. And that definitely didn't happen. And if the flag had not been thrown, we would never have thought about that. We wouldn't have even known there was a holding, because it took them like 5 angles of finally finding the jersey tug, and they wouldn't have even bothered. They would have said, okay, here's the receiver. Mahomes missed the pass because it was 10 yards in front of the receiver. It didn't affect the play, maybe, and that's why the flag was thrown. But again, the official saw a jersey tug and he threw a flag. So nobody can blame the official for doing that.
Yeah. What's interesting is, I mean, these are other layers where I'll have to. I don't have all the. I haven't been grinding the all 22 on this to get all the different angles, but I've heard or seen some people looking at it where it seems like there are a couple different things going on, which makes this interesting. And I think maybe this is probably one of the more interesting angles of it is kind of like, what do we want officials really to do? So number one was that supposedly the flag was not thrown until later. Like it wasn't an immediately thrown, like it was thrown after the ball came down. So there might have been some instance of like, oh, well, this actually affected the guy who was being targeted on the play.
So
which
if you look at my timeline, I just right before we started recording, I tweeted the all 22. If you want to see the official and when he throws the flag.
Well, why don't you tell me when does he throw the flag?
So it is late. So okay. So I'm watching. So Mahomes drops back, he throws, the ball goes over his head, and the ball lands on the ground the same time that the penalty flag does, which for a defensive holding and not pass interference, that is pretty late.
Yeah. I mean, that seems late to me. I mean, I'd have to go in, grind some more film just to see how long it actually takes these guys on average to throw it.
The official sees the ball going over the receiver's head and then throws the flag.
Because I don't know. I don't know how often they're throwing it initially, but it was it was initially done. So there's that. So there was maybe some thinking as to whether or not they should do it, and it was influenced by the receiver being targeted, which technically is not part of defensive holding because it would happen before the ball was released. So it's defensive holding. And it happened
not just being targeted, but the throw missing by so much. Maybe he thought Patrick Mahomes threw this way over the receiver's head, so it must have restricted the receiver in some way.
All right, let's stop. Stop with your propaganda here. I'm still talking. So there's that. Number two is, I cannot be sure of this, but if you were going to set up a play to get a defensive holding call, like that was a pretty good play to set up because you had a misdirection at the line of scrimmage, where most defensive backs are going to try to be handsy in that situation. I think the problem with Bradbury is he grabbed the jersey. Like that's what if he would have just put his arm around his waist or something like that and held him a little bit more, he probably could have gone away with it. But he did grab the jersey, and it also looked like Mahomes, like it was isolated on that side so the guy could see it. Like it's right there. It's right in front of the line judge who's over there. And Mahomes was like pointing to it and like, what did you not see that sort of thing? So all that is context that goes into it. So it's not as simple as like you should always make that sort of flag sort of thing. So that's there's definitely some question. I definitely think refs are thinking a little bit about whether or not they want to do it, maybe in any circumstance though, for that type of play versus thinking about it in the context of what's going on. But the last thing that I'll say, and I don't know, like again, I don't like this like ticky tack. That seems to be people's favorite thing is calling it ticky tack or not because I don't know what a is like just tackling the guy non-ticky tack. Like what is non-ticky tack? Because at least according to the rules of the league here, there is like a video that talks about the video rule book and nicely narrated by Rich Eisen also on here where it's talking about it, and it has here, it says, and he specifically says any grab of the jersey by the defender is defensive holding. You're not allowed to grab the jersey. Like that's like a black and white type of situation for the call. I'm not saying it always happens or not, but I think people saying they were letting this go all game and now they're calling it. Well, I don't know how many times they saw a jersey being grabbed. Again, I'm sure jerseys were grabbed, but I don't know how many times they saw a jersey being grabbed before that. So that's my case for, this being fairly black and white. And if you start deputizing officials to decide based upon context to make a call or not make a call, I don't know. I feel like more bad than good can come of it in a lot of circumstances.
Yeah. I think the context argument is a bad one about whether or not it should be called. Like,
yeah,
if he saw that in the second quarter and thought it was a flag, then he should throw the flag. If he saw it then, he should throw the flag.
Isn't that the main argument, though? At least in some people's minds, I think. But maybe not.
Yeah. I think there are absolutely a lot of people that made the argument. I think the better context argument that it is a great context argument is just, again, for a neutral person, that like the flag at that moment had much more of an impact on the enjoyability of the game than if it had come.
No, I agree with that. Yeah, I think we're all in agreement there, although that's not necessarily what people are primarily saying is their reason. And one other thing I'll say, because I got this a couple of times, I guess, I don't know why. Like, do I need to talk about Dan Orlovsky? But I have heard this argument multiple times in a different way. And I feel like he had a very, very bad analogy that I've heard that he used that I didn't actually see it myself. But it was this whole thing of the other thing I want to kind of swat away a little bit that I think is superfluous is the idea of they were letting him play all game until this point because they hadn't called a pass interference or a defensive holding until that point. And I'll just say that, 20% of games don't have that call the entire game. Either one of those calls the entire games. 40% of games do not have a defensive holding the entire game. And I guess Dan Orlovsky, as part of his spiel, was saying it's like testing an umpire's strike zone as to whether it's strike or ball, and then you have a feel for it later on in the game. I mean, if they're never being called, though, so it's like you're not getting the feedback that you're getting from an umpire. Like, a lot of these games is never being called the entire time. So does that mean you think you can just tackle someone on the last play, every play, because it's not, if it hasn't been called until that point? I think that's like totally nonsense. And the Juju Smith-Schuster thing, the fact that he was fouled earlier and it wasn't called, I mean, they just missed a call. Like, isn't that more likely than they're like, it's cool if you pull down a receiver's arm when he's trying to catch the ball?
Maybe, but if you're a player, you don't know if you got away with something because the official saw it and thought they were letting it go that game, or because they didn't see it. So, I
mean, that was pretty bad, though. The Juju Smith-Schuster one, he pulled down his arm. Like, I don't know, you can't catch with one arm. But maybe you're right. Yeah, I don't know.
Players get away with that all the time. It's a matter of whether your body happens to be blocking the view of whatever official is
right. So, but that would go to my point. They missed it, right? They couldn't see it, and I think that's another thing that people aren't accounting for enough here. It's just like we're not saying there were no fouls. My side, I'm part of the good penalty of wearing my Rob Lowe NFL hat. I'm not saying there were no fouls to that point, but there's a difference between seeing something and not calling it and just not seeing something in the same point. I think people get a little confused there. But anyway, we're mostly on the same page. I wanted to see more too. Bradbury, just don't grab his jersey, dude. Like, why not that? Why don't we just put the blame there?
I actually think last year's call was a lot worse, and so this was the Rams right at the end, and like that one I think has a much more legitimate argument of not even being a foul, but people didn't care because the Bengals still got a chance to answer, and that's what we remember is the end is the Bengals still got their chance and failed, but where here the call was easier to argue that it was correct because everyone in the world can see that the jersey got pulled, but we never got to see the Eagles get their chance, and that's going to be the last thing we remember from this game.
Okay, what about also, I think you may have even said this, and I think this is an interesting one. When it comes to the defensive holding there, if you I think you can only tell players so much in the moment about the contextual stuff, right? Like, they got a lot of things to think about, okay? And most of what they're thinking about is not letting the receiver they are covering, because this is man coverage we're talking about here, catch the ball. Like, that's what they're thinking about more than anything else. At the same point in time, do you think it's reasonable to say that there could, or you should attempt to communicate something where you're saying to the player, okay, first down is the worst case scenario here. Stopping them is obviously the best case scenario. Touchdown is the second best scenario. So don't do something where they get a first down and not a touchdown.
Yeah, I think a lot of times us on the outside can be a little overzealous with like prescribing how people should act in the game, because you're not playing a video game where you can instantly send communication to all your players. But in this very case, they had the whole 2-minute warning, the Chiefs ran a play, and then there was a timeout. So if they wanted to, they had plenty of time to communicate if that's what they wanted to do. And
right, because it wasn't just that one play; it would have applied on second down also. The same concept.
So during that 2-minute warning, and if there's a team that should be smart enough to be thinking like this, it's the Eagles too. So like, somebody on that team has to have known and thought about, okay, if the Chiefs get a first down without scoring a touchdown, the game's basically over. So I think it would be reasonable to communicate that to the players too, where you're not saying, like, I don't know the best way to frame this to players, because obviously you still want them to try and to prevent the Chiefs from getting a first down, but at the same time, they have to know that getting caught holding and giving the Chiefs a first down is basically the end of the game. So if you think you're going to get beat and there's no safety help, then okay, fine, they score a touchdown, but that's not as bad as holding and getting caught for holding.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where it's really hard. Like, and I also think just because the player did it, we also cannot assume they didn't tell them that, right? Because like you can tell a player that, and then they're just like, I mean, it's just instinctual, right? Like you can't necessarily stop. It's like, that's just how I play defense. And it's not necessarily something that's going to be ingrained in their mind in that sort of way. I do think maybe there's like a cool sort of way of looking at it, of like, maybe you leave the end zone kind of open in a way, because you're like getting them to throw the ball to run to so the clock stops if it's not a completion on there, and you're preventing the worst case scenario of the first down and no touchdown. Again, this might be galaxy braining a little bit, but
that's basically what they did. There was nobody else over there, and they threw it to the end zone. But
yeah, that's basically what they did, other than the hold they got caught on that. And it was a vet move. It was a vet move that you could probably get away with, because I also do believe, and again, I don't want to get into this too much, but I do believe when you're doing a change of direction like that, it's kind of like it's kind of like an out and up sort of move on a route. Like if you grab someone when they're coming out of their break, it doesn't really look that bad, but it can be like highly effective as far as stopping their ability to create separation there. So I do think it was a good move, a good vet move by Bradbury that did not go right. Okay, we've talked about this stuff almost ad nauseum here, but let's see. Is there anything else that we have to talk about in this particular? Oh, the lit up score thing. I want to talk about this a little bit. I'm of the opinion that they need to start telling these players not to get so close to the end zone on the lit up score thing. Like, like McKinnon. I don't know, man. If I'm the Eagles, I'm grabbing them and just pulling them into the end zone. Like that's what I'm like. Why did they get so close to almost scoring? That seemed highly dangerous to me.
Yeah, there is a little bit of value in going past the first down marker, because closer field goals are easier. But yeah, you definitely don't want to risk scoring a touchdown. And more credit to Greg Olsen, where he was very, very aware of the situation. And I think a lot of color commentators would have had no idea what was going on, but like he was very on the ball of, the Chiefs really don't want to be scoring here.
Yeah. Because the Browns did that to somebody. They pulled him into the end zone. I forget who it was.
I think wasn't that in like a Falcons-Lions game or something?
Oh, did that happen too? I definitely know the Browns did it one time. Maybe they did it another time where they basically pulled him into the end zone. So I'd watch out for that. Like maybe do more of like if no one's touched you, just hit the ground and like roll over to get past the first down, and then just stay there. So there's no way you could be potentially dragged into the end zone. Maybe that's one little tiny point that I would throw on there. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about these two teams specifically, because I've been talking about the teams that are getting eliminated as they've been getting eliminated and what their plan should be in the offseason and all that sort of stuff. We don't have to get into a ton of details here because we've gone pretty long on the Super Bowl itself. But I want to talk about the Chiefs mostly because we did a pod last year about the top NFL front offices. I think we gave our top 5, our bottom 5, and maybe a couple of overrated, underrated sort of things. So we both had the Eagles in the top 5. I think we both had them as number 4, although we both also said that we came up with 4 that were good front offices, and then we had trouble trying to figure out who our 5th was going to be. So they're kind of like, there's not a big separation between 1 and 4 in those scenarios. The Chiefs were not in either one of our top 5s. I don't think we even mentioned them necessarily in the overrated, underrated sort of scenario, but they're getting a lot of praise right now. Eric Eager, number 1 Chiefs fan, number 1 Vikings fan, pretending to be a Chiefs fan. He is like lavishing praise on Veach, and everyone else is doing that there. I don't know. Well, what do you think about the Chiefs and the job that they have done specifically, and what you think about Veach?
Yeah, so I think their moves in the last year or so have made sense. So they saw the Tyreek Hill contract coming, got other players for him, and said, perhaps in reaction to what happened in the Tampa Bay Super Bowl, we can't let our offensive line be terrible again. Although that was because of injuries, so it's kind of weird to like completely react to something where like if your tackles get injured in the playoffs, then you're going to be kind of screwed no matter what. But it worked out for them. They rebuilt their offensive line and they bet on Mahomes, Kelsey, Reed, and an offensive line will be able to outscore anybody, and that's exactly what happened. So I see why they're getting praise, but when I think of like front offices that are making decisions based on information, the Chiefs are not one of the organizations that comes to mind.
Yeah, no, I'll agree. So there's some things I think that they did well over this offseason specifically. How much, and I'll also talk maybe a little bit about like how much credit can we allocate, because I think Tyreek Hill trade was it's almost a default right move if you can get that type of draft capital for a non-quarterback and not pay them a ton of money. It's very unlikely that you're losing like an opportunity cost sort of thing there. Like not being too locked into this idea of windows, when we're talking about having Kansas City, where I think they maybe were a little bit too locked into that in prior years. But this year not being as much. But at the same point in time, I don't know how much they wanted to sign him to a big deal. They just couldn't quite get there, and then Hill wanted to leave. Like, that's part of it. But we talked about it a little bit with Jamal Adams, right? Like, how much credit do we give Joe Douglas for the Jamal Adams trade when Jamal Adams wanted to get out of town, right?
Yeah, or the Seahawks for Russell Wilson.
Or the Seahawks for Russell Wilson. Well, Pete Carroll's he's had a master plan for a decade to piss off Russell Wilson and get him out of town. So maybe we should give him some credit there. So Hill, I think it was kind of like no-brainer, good trade in the long term. So I think that but a lot of people wouldn't necessarily. You could have made him play. You could have forced him to stay and then play and done that whole thing. So that's interesting. I think the best thing that they did this season is, again, somewhat a reversal on how they had viewed windows. Because if you look at Patrick Mahomes' contract, when he signed that absurd 10-year deal, his cap hits coming out of that, the way they structured it, $5.3 million the first year in 2020, $7.4 million in 2021. This last year, it jumped up to $35.8 million. So, almost $30 million jump here, and they didn't restructure it. Like, they could have restructured it clearly. Like, they could just restructuring this thing left and right. So they didn't restructure it. They stuck with it. They traded Tyreek Hill. I thought it was really, really great that they weren't doing this all-in window type of thing. And I'll give them credit for that. And I'm glad the results came through, too, to show, hey, it's not always about maximizing your potential to win that very much next year, which is really a marginal difference a lot of the times for these things. Yep. And then sacrificing the future is not always the way to go. The fact that they could bank a championship in this type of year is really powerful. And it was good that they were willing to do that.
Yeah. If you have a 27-year-old quarterback who's the best quarterback in the league, then yeah, it makes sense to try to be good for a very long time and just always be in the mix and hope that things break your way one year, which is what ended up happening this year.
Yeah, and they did not extend Orlando Brown too, who I think his value has probably gone down year over year. Like, yeah. I don't think he looked great. They brought in a bunch of mid-tier receiving options, so I think that was pretty good. I'm not in love with the Kadarius Toney trade necessarily, but he did something in the Super Bowl, so we'll talk about that. We won't talk about his 170 receiving yards during the regular season. So I think that looks good there. So yeah, I don't know, but I guess I'm with you. I still don't know if I believe there's a consistent process-based reliability for the decisions that they will make going forward.
Yep, totally with you.
Okay, and Eagles, any change up or down based upon what they did this season, or additional notes that any way that you view them even differently from how you viewed them a year ago?
I don't think so. Maybe we should. It's hard to know like how much they predicted ahead of time, given what we know now. But like maybe we should be giving them even more credit for the AJ Brown trade than we did at the time, where it's kind of like what the Bills did with Stephon Diggs, where you have this young quarterback, you need to find out if he's the guy or not. So let's put as much around him as we can and see if he's the guy or not. And turns out having AJ Brown really helped Jalen Hurts, who, yes, he got a lot better, but it also helps to have a lot of great receiving options. So usually the nerds are pretty against sending first round picks for players that need to be paid, but I think in this circumstance, it made sense.
Yeah. No, I think so. I mean, I think probably just as like a heuristic, I may not have been as high on that trade as a lot of other people were, because a lot of stuff we talked about as far as like non-quarterbacks, paying them, giving up picks, things like that. It makes it a lot easier when you have Jalen Hurts on the contract that he has. He's a lot younger than Hill and Devontae Adams, which were, Devontae Adams was definitely a trade I was much, much, much lower on, making that for the Raiders than this trade. I also think it was a good signal in a way to say we drafted a receiver 10th overall.
Yeah.
In the draft. We have Dallas Goedert, who luckily you don't have to pay tight ends that much for them. So they're in a great situation there with Goedert. But still, Goddard's a solid guy. I do think it was a good, and this is what a lot of teams are learning. Like there are a lot of teams are like, oh, I think we have the receiver position filled, and then midway through the season, they're like, oh my God, it's a disaster out here with receivers, of just being willing to just pour resources into the most important areas and not really care if you have like some form of duplication there.
Yeah, and it also helps them that they have this Ponzi scheme of first round draft picks where they always just have extra first round picks lying around due to Carson Wentz or trading with the Saints or however they happen to obtain them.
Yeah. We talked about the Carson Wentz Ponzi scheme. We'll see if that comes in. Maybe we have another layer. Someone's still left. There's still the multi-level marketing is going on. They're going to have to get, Commanders are kind of at the bottom, though, I would say, of the sucker chain when we talk about the multi-level marketing, but maybe they can find someone else, get them to the CFL or something and make some money off of there. Jalen Hurts. That's probably the one question, right? You have any? I mean, it's all contingent on like how much you can sign him for, but I don't think this is. You know how like teams don't care about burning money, but you know how it'll probably end up happening with Sirianni and Roseman again this season, or Veach and Andy Reid. Andy Reid, I'm fine with. But like teams, when they have their best results, they go and like give their coach and GM a new 6-year contract and then like fire him 2 years later. This is definitely buying high on Hurts no matter what, right? Like no matter how much you love him, you got to give him a $50 million plus contract right now. And you don't have the 5th-year option. So you're already in franchise tag territory for next season, and it's going to be your story the entire offseason if you don't re-sign him. So what, Ben Baldwin, what you say here, because you can't give him a deal where you're going to be able to credibly cut ties with him for more than, 5-6 years probably.
Yeah, although as you have pointed out repeatedly, when teams commit to quarterbacks and we say they can't get out of them these deals for a long time, if they really want to get out of the deals, they can. I mean, and we saw this even with Carson Wentz and Jared Goff, and
they had better contracts, though. I will say they had a little bit, like, there's been a step up in the contract. I mean, let's just look at Kyler Murray. So I'll look at Kyler as an example here. So here's the problem with Kyler Murray's deal. He has these rolling guarantees. He has these rolling guarantees where even in 2026, so that will be the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 5th year of his contract, on March 22nd, the base salary, which is only $19 million for 2027, kicks in. So like even for Kyler Murray, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The soonest you can cut him and not just get completely destroyed. Like there's no way you can cut him because you'll be taking a cap hit. If you cut him earlier, you'll be taking a cap hit of like $70 million is really after 5 seasons. So I guess there's a little bit more protection built into these deals with the rolling guarantees than there was for Wentz and Goff. But go ahead. Sorry. Continue.
So at least if OTC is right, if the Cardinals traded him sometime after this year, it would be like $13 million in dead money. So yes, they would have to find a trade partner, but
right. Okay. Yeah, you're right. There is a trade partner. There is the trade partner angle who'd be willing to pay him. But also the OTC stuff, it gets a little confusing because the numbers don't incorporate. I don't think it matters here because we're talking about a trade. But if you're looking at cutting and cap savings, like those numbers aren't right because of the rolling guarantees, because they're only accounting for the rolling guarantees that are currently affected. But you're right. You could trade. That's a good thing. Should you? I guess they could think about structuring in some way to potentially have a trade out at a certain point.
Yeah, and that's even if it doesn't work out and the Eagles decide to move on, all it takes is one team willing to trade for him, one Washington Commanders or Indianapolis Colts or somebody to take him off your hands. And I think what we have learned in recent years is that like there's always some team that needs a quarterback that is willing to talk themselves into almost any quarterback, even Carson Wentz. Okay. So in terms of extending him, they're either going to have to play the franchise tag game or give him a deal that is probably commensurate. Like he was in the MVP race legitimately for most of the season until he got hurt, and I
mean, he was second. He was second in the voting. So yeah.
And you can point to his surroundings and they were very good, but he also he adds a lot of value with his rushing threat, which we'll see how long that lasts. But right now he's young and healthy once his shoulder heals and should still be expected to be a top-ish quarterback going forward. So I don't see what alternative the Eagles have to paying him, and then if it goes south, try to unload him on someone else.
Yeah. I think there's also an interesting thing with Hurts where if you do extend him, you're going to have like a 2-year window where maybe his cap hits are lower, but you also have with the Eagles here, I'm looking, they got a lot of they're really using up the void years. You have guys like Jason Kelce, who's going to retire, but then there's going to be like a bunch of dead cap for him. And then Javon Hargrave has a void on there. Brandon Graham has a void on there. James Bradbury has a small void on there. So there's a lot of players who they don't have signed beyond this year, but they're going to be paying in some form with these void years that, I don't know. I think it'll be interesting for the Eagles to see whether or not it's next year or the year after. Perhaps they try to figure out when they can do a bit of a reshuffling, type of situation, a down year as far as maxing out their cap spending and their talent to clean some of this up in conjunction with the fact that Jalen Hurts' contract is going to go way up. What do you think about the idea of maybe trading someone like Devontae Smith in the future?
Yeah, before he needs his payday.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess it depends on what their cap situation looks like at that point. If they think that they're not going to have the room to pay him, then it would make sense. Although I would be somewhat nervous having A.J. Brown as my only real top receiver, just because he's never been on the field for a high portion of snaps, and you want to make sure he's always at 100% to the extent possible. So it would make me a little bit nervous, but if you're offered a first round pick instead of having to pay him $25 million or whatever, then just like we talked about with the Tyreek Hill thing, it's hard to say no to.
Yeah, it's probably not this season, but I do think if you want to schedule a bit of a reshuffling, not 2023 but 2024, that could be interesting. I think teams, when you're paying a quarterback a lot of money, I do think teams need to think a lot about using wide receivers, especially if you have a good quarterback and you have wide receivers who are putting up good numbers, turning over the wide receivers a little bit more often before paying them, and just investing in the draft, just continually investing in the draft to use it that sort of way is an interesting potential for them. Okay, let's talk Seahawks real fast here. I don't want to keep you for too much longer. So are you okay with Geno going forward?
So I I think he's probably an average-ish NFL starting quarterback, which is not nothing.
Yes.
And
let me look up to see where he is on the ringer quarterback rankings, because that's the most authoritative.
I think he's like fringe
view.
Top 10-ish.
Ringer quarterback ratings. Oh wait, where is he? Oh, he's 11. He must have gone down. I could have sworn he was higher than this. What's going on here? Jalen Hurts is moving up. Has moved up so rapidly. I think he was in the 20s to start the season. Go ahead.
So like fringe top 10-ish quarterback, which is not nothing. And in most cases, teams
I like average better than fringe top 10. Go ahead.
In most cases, I would say that the team doesn't really have much of a choice to extend him because the alternative options aren't great. And this is like the Titans with Tannehill, or the Vikings with Cousins, or the Raiders with Derek Carr. Like all of those extensions I was okay with at the time because the team didn't really have great alternatives. But the difference here is that the Seahawks have a top 5 pick in a draft with a lot of quarterback prospects. So the alternative for the Seahawks is very different than the typical team that is making a decision about a older starting quarterback. So because of this, I think that basically they're deciding between using top 5 pick on a good quarterback prospect plus whatever they can get for Geno Smith, which they would probably tag him and trade him, and I would guess they could get something out of that. That's option A. Kevin's making faces here.
I don't know about option. But anyway, go ahead.
Option B is to pay him a lot of money and use the number 5 pick on what would probably presumably be a pass rusher or some sort of defensive lineman. And I think given the upside of a quarterback on a rookie contract, especially given that you lucked into this pick in a draft where there are quarterback prospects, I think it makes a lot more sense to do that. And I also think there's a 1% chance that that's what the Seahawks actually do.
Yeah. They have their running back. Okay. They got their running back solved. They don't have to worry about anything else. Okay. How about this? I got an idea for you. How about transition tag? And
is this the one where the someone needs to send 2 first-round picks to?
No, that's the non-exclusive franchise tag. So the transition tag, and I could
this is the match the offer one.
Yeah.
Okay,
I could be completely messing this up, how it works. But my belief is you save a few bucks, right? It's $29 million for the transition tag, and for me, the way I see it, tell me if you agree with this or not. I think Geno Smith's value to the Seahawks is much higher than his potential theoretical value when factoring in like confidence in how good you think he'll be to another team. So if you transition tag him, maybe you realize at that point, hey, wait a second, like this guy's not getting like $30 million a year sort of offers from anyone else. And then you can use that leverage to actually negotiate down because you're giving him a window into the fact that free agency may not be as lucrative as he's going to think it is as part of his negotiation stand.
Yeah. So this is the great unknown, is how other teams other than the Seahawks value him. And
yeah.
If
Steve Ruiz gets a GM job in this offseason and he and Greg Rosenthal are GM somewhere and they're offering him $50 million a year?
I think there are teams that would definitely you would definitely make a difference for it. Like, can you imagine the Jets this past season if they had Geno Smith?
Right, but if they have if you have Derek Carr, Jimmy Garoppolo, who else is out there? There's other guys out there, whoever else is out there. Like, if you have those guys, and I think the Jets are an attractive place for a quarterback to go to, or do you want Geno Smith before you want those guys?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I would probably be.
And it's the Jets, like the history and everything else. Yeah, I don't know. But go ahead.
I think I would be probably close to indifferent between those guys. Jimmy G would worry me just because he's. I don't think he's bad, but he's just always injured. So
it's Shanahan's fault. We know that. Shanahan just goes out there.
All his quarterbacks and running backs are always
injured. So now we have a sample that everyone gets injured there. not just
But
Jimmy.
there's a lot of teams that need quarterbacks, but there's also a lot of available quarterbacks plus teams that will be drafting quarterbacks. So yeah, there'll definitely be some musical chairs this season.
It'll be interesting. I mean, I think it's an interesting exercise. I think I would do it, honestly. If I were the Seahawks, I would transition tag him. Or, non-exclusive tag him, but whatever. I like the transition tag. Transition tag him and then look hard at a quarterback at number 5. The problem is, you just don't know. The draft comes, unlike the NBA, the draft comes after all of the free agency and all of the veteran sort of stuff.
Yep.
So you can't go in naked into 2023 with no one and then not be able to get a quarterback you want in the draft, and then you got Drew Lock out there and Pete Carroll. They'll drive Pete Carroll into retirement. Because the thing with Geno, okay, tell me if I'm wrong on this. There's too many different biases out there, but I feel like, was it primacy bias? Whatever is the one where your initial impression is the strongest impression. Yeah. I feel like you're suffering from that with Geno. I get recency bias is the thing that everyone talks about, but I feel like for Geno, if you ask people where he finished the year in terms of his grading or his EPA per play or how good he was in the second half of the season, I think a lot of people are just remembering the fact that he's he was playing like a top 5 quarterback, right? Or top 10 quarterback. And they don't realize that it was more like a quarterback in the 20s the second half of the season.
Yeah, and more than half. It was he had a great first 5 games of the season, and then however, let's see, 13 games. Yeah, the last generous. 13 games were less.
And he's throwing to Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. It's not like chopped liver up there or something.
Yeah, that if I were another team, I think that would be the greatest concern. Would be how well what he did, or the extent to which what he did this season translates to another environment where he doesn't have DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. And we even saw it when Tyler Lockett got hurt and when Abe Lucas, their right tackle, got hurt. The offense just could not do anything. I think that was in December or something. And they're all quarterbacks are sensitive to their surroundings to some extent, but I think that would definitely give me pause.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to seem like too much of a Geno hater, even though I am slightly. I'm not saying pay him $30 million. I mean, geez, Geno, take it. Okay, one other thing I'll say with the Seahawks, and then maybe I get your impression on this, and this relates to Geno too, before I let you get out of here, is they made the playoffs. But what is their path to be a sustainable playoff team going forward? I guess the NFC stinks. So that's probably your best bet for that happening. But can you even think about further kind of retooling, I guess they would say, rather than rebuilding? And how does that affect your perception of what to do with a lot of different players?
Yeah, I think their only real path to improving is hitting on another draft like they did last year. And they have the picks to do it. So they still have the Broncos' first 2 picks, which are picks, 5 and 36 or something, with the Dolphins not having a first round pick. So those are 2 good picks, and the Seahawks have their own picks. So if they hit on another draft like they did this past year, then their roster will be in much better shape than it was a couple years ago. But at the same time, if you look at their games, they played the 49ers 3 times, and it's just very obvious that those 2 teams are in such a different world from each other. And that's also true for the Cowboys and the Eagles that they didn't play against, but are about as good as the 49ers. And it's unless they really, really hit on a draft, or if Geno Smith from September 2022 comes back, or they draft a quarterback who's really good, which is not going to happen. It's hard to see them breaking into the top tier of.
Are you really that confident that they won't draft someone? Because I mean, remember, all the stories were that Schneider was, gaga over Josh Allen back in the day. Maybe a Will Levis type or someone like that who can really sling it.
So I think if they drafted somebody, it would be with one of the second round picks or something like that. So yeah, maybe they tag Geno and use a second round pick on a quarterback, but. Pete Carroll is a defensive guy. The defense is his baby, and their defense was just terrible last year. So I would be pretty surprised if they didn't use their a lot of their high picks on improving their pass rush and stopping their run.
Yeah. There's a generational defensive tackle in this draft that they can take in number 5. Any quick words on Russ before Russ and Sean Payton before we get out of here? What's your feeling on? Because I think people are pretty low on his chance to bounce back. Not that there aren't like people saying we think he can bounce back, but there's not really like enthusiasm, I would say, around that opinion.
Yeah, the Sean Payton thing is interesting. Where like there was this discussion around him when the Broncos traded for him, which sounds weird to say about a coach, and they're going back to the uncertainty about coaches discussion. Like there are a lot of people who are very, very, very sure that Sean Payton is a great coach. And that could be the case, but the evidence that people give is always like, oh, he had a great offense every year with the Saints. But he also had Drew Brees, whose offenses were very good in San Diego before he went to the Saints. So it's like, if we're just saying that Sean Payton is a good coach because they had a good offense when they have like a very, very top echelon Hall of Fame quarterback, I think that's not that convincing. So
hey, he developed Taysom. He developed.
He was going to be the next big thing.
The next Steve Young, I believe. But okay, go ahead.
So yeah, I'm pretty skeptical, and I probably would not have traded that much draft capital for a head coach, but we'll see.
What about Russ? Just generally, do you think his cookedness, especially in terms of mobility, you think there's something real there?
So I don't know if it's mobility as much as like all the injuries on his body parts that throw the football. So he
I'll get technical with me. Technical with me.
So he broke it was like his middle finger on his throwing hand, I think, in 2021. Did not look the same after that. Had a whole offseason to heal, and then in like the third game of the season,
he was doing 20 hours of physical therapy a day on that. So
like tore his shoulder and like just never looked like himself. So if I were the Broncos, the thing I would be most concerned about would be like his for as much as we laud his scrambling and improvisation and stuff like that, like his best trait probably was his accuracy and deep ball, and that was just never there in Denver. So the big concern is that all the injuries have taken this toll on him, and he'll just never be the same guy again. If you want to be optimistic, then I guess you would hope that with another offseason to rest, he'll get better. But I think it's possible that we'll just never see that accurate version of Russell Wilson again.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I want to say he's gonna come back, but like there's just this like very intense kind of guttural feeling that is maybe not. I don't know. I'm kind of in the boat with some people there that I guess it wouldn't shock me because it looks so bad. Like there's not even a hint of a way out there. So, all right. Well, Ben, thank you so much for joining me. I know I kept you a little bit long here. Before you go, though, I just want to say for Ben and Sebastian and Tan and everyone that's worked with the NFL verse and getting all of that data there, incredible stuff. I mean, even now I'm getting into like the contract stuff and other stuff. Basically, like I'd just be a hobo right now, if not for the availability of this data and to use it and to put it out onto the Substack. So thanks so much for that, man. Anything you want to plug on the way out here?
Nope. Glad the data is useful. There's a lot of data sources, so check out whatever the website's called. NFL, is it NFLverse.com? I think it might be. And then if you go there, there's
NFLverse.com.
And then so for anyone listening, if you go to NFLverse.com, click on functions. But somewhere there's a list of functions that has all the possible data sources, and you might see something interesting if you want to poke around with it.
Yeah. That, I mean, if you want to talk about the other stuff, it's like the NFL Faster, NFL Reader. Those are probably the primary ones that you're going to go to. And if you just look that stuff up, packages and more on the upper on the right hand side. So you bring that down, you'll see all the stuff there. You see all the stuff there. Including great examples that you've even put there. You can just copy and paste and start getting to work.
So what I was thinking of was the NFL Reader website. So it's NFLreader.NFLverse.com. If you go there and click on functions, then there's just this big list of functions that are arranged by what types of data they bring in, and then you can see what we have. There's a lot now. Some stuff I didn't even know about until I looked at this page.
Yeah. No, this has been awesome. I mean, the participation data going back to 2016 has been extremely helpful for me. And again, like I mentioned, I'm using the trade and contract stuff now to try to like isolate free agency and other things like that, how players are doing. So just hugely useful, and a huge benefit to everyone out there. I'll just say it right here. I mean, I remember this thing of, we're talking about like making an impact and what people are doing. I mean, the work that you and others have done with this is going to make a much bigger impact than, anyone like firing off their takes, football takes, trying to teach people how to do stuff out there. So thank you so much for that. And then also visit, rbsdm.com for box scores and other stuff like that. You might need to work on the marketing there with the website name, but also great information there available that people have used. I see it come up in articles, and again, great public free stuff that you're putting out there, where I think you're just sucking us in, and eventually, like a good drug dealer, you're gonna make us pay eventually. But I'm definitely hooked for one.
Some people pay, and I'm very grateful for them, because I don't want to pay my own server costs.
Yeah. I'll have to start kicking you guys some dollars for sure on that, now that I'm using that versus everything at PFF. But all right, man, thanks so much for the time and discussing everything. I'll get you on hopefully later on this offseason, maybe post draft, and we'll rank our front offices and all that sort of stuff. People love the rankings, and we'll do that. But until then, thanks, man.